Hello everyone. In this class, let us learn about transportation in human beings. What is transportation? Transport or transportation is nothing but some movement, correct? So what has to move in a human beings? As you know that in the last class, we learned that how the digested food will be absorbed by the villi. From the villi, it reaches the blood vessels and the blood will carry that food towards the cell. The carrying the food by the blood towards the cell is nothing but even that is also one of the examples of the movement. Apart from that, we also learned that the cell also need the oxygen for breaking the food into energy. So the oxygen need to be supplied to the cell. From the lungs, the oxygen has to move towards the cell. Even that was also one of the example of the movement or transportation. So here, even in a human beings also, the transportation plays a very important role. As you know that the human beings belongs to a multicellular organism which has got large body with complicated structure, correct? So the transport of material in each and every cell, it is not possible by a simpler process called as diffusion. As you know, what is diffusion? The movement of the molecule from an higher concentration to the lower concentration. Correct. The simpler process, what is takes place in the lower organism, cannot be taken place in a higher organism. Hence, there is a require of organ system to transport the materials to the cell of a body. What are the materials has to be transported? Might be food or a oxygen. Such organs which helps in transporting the material, we call that as a transport system. So now we'll see what the transport system of human being consists of. The transport system of human being or a man consists of or includes blood vessels and the heart. So blood vessels and the heart helps in transporting the materials from one cell to the another cell. Now we'll see the first component of the transport system in human is a blood. So the blood play a very important role in the transport system. So what is blood? A blood is a fluid connective tissue. It is one of the fluid connective tissue, or we can also call it as a liquid connective tissue. It consists of a fluid matrix. What do we call that? As a plasma. You can see here, this is the plasma. This is a fluid which is present in the blood. Then this plasma is present over here. Inside this plasma, you can also see some of the solid constituents such as RBC. This is RBC, WBC, and some of the platelets are present. So blood is a fluid connective tissue. It consists of a fluid matrix called as plasma, and apart from that, blood also consists of a solid constituent such as RBC, WBC, and platelets, or we can also call it as red blood corpuscles, white blood corpuscles, and platelets. Now let us see the function of the components of blood. The first fluid matrix, what we call it as a plasma, we'll see the function of the plasma. The plasma contains 90% of water and 8% of protein, and remaining 2% of hormone, food materials such as glucose, amino acid, fatty acid, vitamins, salts, urea, all will be present in the plasma. And the color of the plasma, when you just observe here, it is yellowish color fluid which helps in transport of food, carbon dioxide, and some of the waste, nitrogenous waste, which is produced by the cell in a dissolved form. And each and every wherever it has to be transported in that particular part of the body, it will be transported. So what is the function of the plasma? That helps in transport of food, carbon dioxide, and nitrogenous waste in a dissolved form. The next component of the blood is nothing but RBC. The RBCs are also called as red blood corpuscles. They are spherical in shape. You can see over here, spherical in shape and disc shape. They don't have any nuclei. The RBCs, where they are produced? They are produced in the bone marrow. So in the bone marrow, these RBCs will be produced. Usually, healthy human beings should contain 5.4 million RBCs in cubic mm of a blood, millimeter of the blood. Then this RBC, it contains an iron pigment called as hemoglobin. What's the function of the hemoglobin? It gives red color to the blood. Apart from that, hemoglobin play a very important role in exchange of the gases. It helps in transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Where the oxygen will be present? In the alveoli of the lungs. From there, the blood carries the oxygen and give it to the cell. There in the cell, the oxygen will be utilized for producing the energy, and the byproduct obtained is nothing but the carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide from the cell, it will be carried towards the lungs, and from the lungs it will be thrown out from the body. So that means that RBCs helps in transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The next comes WBC. You can see over here, this is WBC. The WBC, it is also called as white blood corpuscles. And this WBCs, when you just observe, even this also produced by in the bone marrow of the cell. This WBC, it's like a soldier of the body. It will protect us from disease-causing microorganisms. If any microorganisms or foreign bodies enter our body, this WBC will get stimulated and they will destroy this disease-causing microorganism, and it protects our body. So they are called as soldiers of our body. So the next comes platelets. You can observe the platelets. This platelets are produced by breaking down of the bone marrow cells. When the bone marrow cells breaks, that platelets will be formed. They are irregular in shape. When you just observe that, they doesn't have any regular shape. They are irregular in shape. They'll be attached to the walls of the blood vessel. Then what is the function of it? It helps in clotting of the blood. Very important. They'll ask what are the functions of the RBC, WBC and the platelets. So you have to say RBC helps in transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. WBC helps in protection by destroying the disease-causing microorganism. Platelets helps in clotting of the blood. So this is about the blood. The next, moving on to blood vessels. So the blood vessel is also one of the part of the transport system. So you know that to carry the blood is a liquid, it's a fluid matrix, correct? So to carry the blood, there is a requirement of the blood vessels. So there are three types of blood vessels, namely arteries. These are the red color one is arteries, veins and the capillaries. You can just observe. Now let us learn about one by one about arteries, veins and the capillaries. So now arteries, when you observe the arteries, they are thick wall. The wall, you can just observe the wall, it is thick and they are made up of smooth muscle fiber and they don't have any valves. The valves, what's the function of the valve is nothing but the valves will prevent the backflow of the blood. These arteries do not have any valves. The blood flows from the artery due to the contraction of the ventricles and that helps in carrying the blood away from the heart to the various organs of the body. So what is the function of the arteries? The arteries, they carry the blood away from the heart. Whatever the heart, when the heart pumps the blood has to be carried away from the heart. So that will be done by the arteries. Arteries, they carry the blood away from the heart to the various organs of the body. Whereas veins, when you just observe the veins are made up of thin and smooth muscle. They have valves to prevent the backflow of the blood. And what is the functions of the veins? They collect the blood from the different organs and bring it back to the heart. Here the arteries carry the blood away from the heart, whereas veins will collect the blood from the different organs and bring it back to the heart. So here the arteries will carry the blood away from the heart, whereas vein collect the blood from the different organs and bring it back to the heart for the further purification. So now capillaries, when you just observe the capillaries, these capillaries are a small pipe-like structure which somewhat we can say that one cell thickness and they don't have any valves and they are connected to the arteries as well as to the veins. So they will help in exchanging the materials between the blood and the surrounding cells that takes place across the thin wall of the capillaries. Here, this big arteries or the vein cannot supply the blood to the cells. So what they do is, these arteries and the veins, you can just see connected to the arteries and the vein, there are a small tube-like structure. We call it as a capillaries. This capillaries helps in exchanging the material between the blood and the cell. So whatever the blood is having, that is from the heart, they would have brought the oxygenated blood, that is which is rich in oxygen. They'll give the oxygen to the cell, and after giving it, they have to take the carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide will be taken and it will go to the veins, and that helps in the exchanging of the materials between the blood and the surrounding cells. So this is the functions of the blood vessels. So next we'll move on to the next very important organ, that is nothing but the heart. Thus, heart is a muscular organ. It is conical shape and it helps in pumping of the blood, as you know that. And this is an organ about a size of one fist, and it is present in a thoracic cavity between the lungs. So remember, an heart, this human heart is made up of 4 chambers. Human heart is made up of 4 chambers. The upper part we call it as a atrium, and lower part we call it as a ventricles. So this is about the heart. Heart is a muscular organ which composed of cardiac muscle. The muscle which is present in the heart, we call it as a cardiac muscle. It is so small that it can fit inside the adult fist, isn't it? So, and the heart is pumping organ which pumps the blood. The heart, human heart, it composed of 4 chambers. Now we'll see the structure of the heart. So now when you observe this heart, the heart is made up of 4 chambers. These are the upper 2 chambers and these are the lower 2 chambers. The upper 2 chambers are called as atria, and lower 2 chambers we call it as a ventricles. So here when you just observe here, this heart, upper chamber, these 2 are the upper chambers. This is right atrium and this is left atrium. This is the ventricles, right ventricle and left ventricle. So the heart is made up of 4 chambers, and in between this is right side and this is left side. In between the right part of the heart and the left part of the heart, there is a muscular layer. This can you see, I guess this is a muscular layer which separates the right part and the left part of the heart. This muscular layer we call it as septum. We call it as a septum, and there is a valve between the auricles as well as the ventricle. That is here one valve is present and here also the valve will be present. We'll see what is the name of the valve. Tricuspid valve is present in right side of a heart. This is between the right atrium and right ventricle. There is a valve called as tricuspid valve, and bicuspid valve will be present between the left atrium and left ventricle. Here you can see the bicuspid valve and here you can see the tricuspid valve. Okay, so now the valves, what is the function of the valve? It will prevent the backflow of the blood from the ventricle to auricle. Usually the blood flows from atrium to ventricle. It will not flow it back. Why it will not flow back? Because of the presence of the valves. So between the right atrium and right ventricle, there is a valve called as tricuspid valve, and between the left atrium and left ventricle, there is a valve called as bicuspid valve. Then you can just observe here the superior vena cava. This one we call it as a superior vena cava, and this one we call it as a inferior vena cava. So what is the function of the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava? Is nothing but the superior and inferior vena cava brings deoxygenated blood from the different parts of the body to the right atrium. So what is the work of the superior and inferior vena cava? They carry the deoxygenated blood. The cell will give the carbon dioxide to the blood. So the such type of blood, we call it as a deoxygenated blood. So that deoxygenated blood will be carried by this superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, and the blood will reach to the right atrium. So that is a function of the superior and the inferior vena cava. Then you can see here the pulmonary veins. So this pulmonary veins, what's a function of the pulmonary veins? These pulmonary veins will bring the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium. So pulmonary veins will bring the blood from the lungs. That what type of blood? Oxygenated blood from the lungs. Through this pulmonary vein, it reaches the left atrium. So next part is aorta. You can see here aorta. Aorta will carry oxygenated blood from different parts of the body. So it will arise from the, just you can observe here, this is the aorta, which will arise from the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, the blood, that is oxygenated blood, will be carried by the aorta to the different parts of the body. So next part is the pulmonary arteries. You can see over here the pulmonary arteries have been divided over here. This pulmonary artery, which is a function of the pulmonary arteries, they arise from the right ventricle, it arises from the right ventricle and carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs for the purification. So what is that? Purification is nothing but deoxygenated blood contains carbon dioxide. This deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary arteries, it goes to the lungs. In the lungs, exchange of gases takes place. That nothing but the blood gives the carbon dioxide and takes the oxygen. So that exchange of gases takes place. For the exchange of the gases, the blood which is present in the right ventricle, it moves through the pulmonary arteries towards the lungs. So this is the structure of the heart. And even though the heart is completely filled with the blood, the muscles of the heart cannot use the oxygen and food present in the blood. So the reason arteries called as coronary arteries, these coronary arteries will supply the oxygenated blood to the heart. So this is the structure of the heart. Remember, heart is made up of 4 chambers. The upper chamber, we call it as atrium, and lower chamber, we call it as a ventricle. And there is a muscular, you can just see over here, the muscular layer, which we call it as a septum, which separates the right part of the heart to the left part of the heart. And there is a valve between the right atrium and right ventricle. We call that valve as a tricuspid valve. And there is a valve between the left atrium and left ventricle. We call it as a bicuspid valve. So what is the function of the valves? It will prevent the backflow of the blood from the ventricle to atrium. It should not flow back. So to prevent that, there is a valve. And apart from that, there is a superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava and inferior vena cava collects the deoxygenated blood from the different part of the body, and it will help in reaching it to the right atrium. So this is about the function of the superior and inferior vena cava. And you have got a pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins will carry the oxygenated blood from the lungs towards the left atrium. Then there is a pulmonary arteries which arises from the right ventricle, which carries the blood, that is the deoxygenated blood, towards the lungs. And there is an aorta which arises from the left ventricle, which carries the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle through the aorta. It reaches the different parts of the body. So this is a structure of the heart. Now let us see how our heart function. So the heart is made up of a strong muscle called as cardiac muscle. These muscles will not allow the heart to get fatigue or tired. Usually you know that our chambers of the heart always contract and relax. The chambers of the heart, by the rhythmic contraction and the relaxation, they create the pressure they require for the maintain the flow of the blood throughout the body. So here, when you just observe the atrium, these two are the atrium. The one is right atrium, other one is left atrium. And this one is right ventricle and left ventricle. See, this atrium and the ventricle contract and relax at the same time. Now we'll see what happens when this atrium, that is upper chamber of the heart is known as atrium. What happens when they get relaxed? Now the heart is relaxed. When the heart is relaxed, what happens? The blood from the superior vena cava and the blood from the inferior vena cava flows into the right atrium. See, so as soon as when the atrium relax, the first what happens in the right side, the deoxygenated blood, the blood which contain carbon dioxide from the upper part of the body, so which we call it as a superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. So the blood from the superior and inferior vena cava flows into a right atrium. This is what happens in the right side. Left side, what happens is the oxygenated blood. What is oxygenated blood? The blood which contain oxygen. Where from the oxygenated blood comes? From the lungs. From the lungs, this pulmonary veins will carry the oxygenated blood and it helps to flow into the left atrium. This is what happens when the atrium get relaxed. Okay, the upper part of the heart, chamber of the heart, what we call it as an atrium, when they relax, this side deoxygenated blood flows into the right atrium. Here what happens? The oxygenated blood from the lungs through the pulmonary veins, it flows into the left atrium. This is what happens. Now when it get contract, what happens? We'll see. When the atrium contracts, what happens is the deoxygenated blood which is present over here, this is right atrium, it flows to the right ventricle. When it is flowing, I told you that there is a valve present over here, tricuspid valve. It prevents the backflow of the blood. This side what happens is nothing but when the atrium contracts, the blood, that is oxygenated blood which is present in the left atrium, flows to the left ventricle, and there is a valve called as bicuspid valve will prevent the backflow of the blood from the left ventricle to the right atrium. So this is what happens when atrium get contracts. Now we'll see when the ventricle contracts, what happens. When the ventricle, this the lower chamber of the heart, when it get contracts, what happens is nothing but, see here what type of blood we have got now? Deoxygenated blood. This deoxygenated blood has to go to the lungs. So, and it has to give the carbon dioxide and take the oxygen, and again it has to come back to the heart. So now what happens when the ventricle contract, the deoxygenated blood which is present in the right ventricle through the pulmonary arteries, it reaches the lungs. And again this side what happens, the oxygenated blood which is present in the left ventricle, it reaches the aorta. From the aorta it goes to the different parts of the body and it will supply the oxygen to the cell, again collect the carbon dioxide, again it comes back to the heart. So you can say that we can call this as a double circulation. Why do we call it as a double circulation? Is nothing but the blood flows through the heart twice to complete the one circulation in the body. This type of circulation we call it as a double circulation. It has got two separate routes. So one we call it as a pulmonary circulation, other one we call it as a systemic circulation. So what is this pulmonary circulation? You can just observe here. It is pulmonary circulation is nothing but the circulation. So see here, from the heart, it is a course taken by the blood. The blood will start moving from the heart. See, from the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, it comes to the right atrium. From the right atrium, it goes to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it goes to the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs. Correct? It goes to the lungs, and here the exchange of the gases takes place. That means that it gives the carbon dioxide and takes the oxygen by the process known as diffusion, and again it will return back to the heart through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. So this part of circulation, we call it as a pulmonary circulation. I'll repeat: the course taken by the blood between the heart and the lungs. It is a course taken by the blood between the heart and the lungs is known as pulmonary circulation. During the pulmonary circulation, what happened? Deoxygenated blood from the right atrium, it goes to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle through the pulmonary arteries, it reaches the lungs. In the lungs, it gives the deoxygenated blood, means carbon dioxide it will be having, right? So it gives the carbon dioxide and takes the oxygen, and again through the pulmonary veins it comes to the right atrium. So this is nothing but the exchange of the blood takes place from the heart to the lungs. So this type of circulation, we call it as a pulmonary circulation. So the next part is systemic circulation. What happens in the systemic circulation? It is a course taken by the blood between the heart and the tissue. So now what happens is, now the oxygenated blood is present in the left atrium. Now from the left atrium, the blood reaches to the, that is, ventricle. From the ventricle, it goes to the aorta. From the aorta, it goes to the different tissue, and it will supply the oxygen to it, and again it will collect the carbon dioxide. Again through the superior and inferior vena cava, it comes back to the heart. So that is why we call it as a systemic circulation. During systemic circulation, what happens is nothing but it is a course taken by the blood between the heart and the tissue of the body is known as systemic circulation. Here what happened? The oxygenated blood which is present in the left atrium goes to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle through the aorta, it will start reaching through the aorta. It will start reaching to the tissue. Then their exchange of the oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place. The blood will give the oxygen, takes the carbon dioxide. Again, it will reach the right atrium through the superior and inferior vena cava. Through this circulation, the body cells get oxygen necessary for the life activity. This because the blood enters the heart twice, we call this circulation as a double circulation. So this is about the double circulation. Now, I told you that human heart is made up of 4 chambers. Why they have to have 4 chambers? What is the use of the 4 chamber? And we know that the human beings are warm-blooded animal. The 4-chamber heart prevents mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Here, nowhere there was a mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and such separation allows an high efficient supply of oxygen to the body. So because there is no mixing, so the oxygen will be supplied to the cell more, and then it will help in liberating more of energy. In higher animals like birds and mammals will use this energy to maintain their body temperature also. So that is the importance of 4-chamber heart. So this is about the heart. Apart from this, there is a one liquid connective tissue, one more, which we call it as a liquid colorless fluid, what we can call it as. So that we call it as a limb. So limb is also very important. Limb is similar to the blood, but the thing is it does not have any RBC in it. RBCs are absent in limbs. This limbs are formed. How it is formed? It is formed from the fluid only, which leaks from the blood capillaries. I told you that blood capillaries are very small. When the blood reaches from the arteries or the veins, when you just observe there, the blood capillaries are small. So there what happens is the limbs are formed from the fluid which leaks from the blood capillaries. The fluid will start leaking, and it goes to the intercellular space of the tissue, and this fluid will be collected through the lymph vessel. Again, one more pipe-like structure vessels, lymph vessel, and again it returns back to the finally returns to the blood capillaries. So the limb is a colorless fluid which is present between the tissue. How it will go towards the tissue when there is a leakage? The fluid which leaks from the blood capillaries, it will leak from the blood capillaries, and then what's the function of it does not have only RBC, that's all. So what is the function of this? It will play a very important role in your immune system. It will protect your body from the microorganism. Limb is a yellowish fluid. It escapes from the blood capillaries and it comes to the intercellular space. It contains less protein than the blood, and they will help in destroying the microorganisms which will enter, and it will protect our body. So this is about our transport system of human beings. Thank you.